A Republican congresswoman who built a political career as a mega firebrand says she's stepping down. Marjorie Taylor Greene's resignation comes after her recent public feud with President Donald Trump. Journalist Steve Futterman has the details on this story, joining us this morning from Los Angeles. Nice to see you, Steve. So this is an ever-changing story. Very quickly, what more can you tell us this morning?
Well, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Donald Trump, they have been very, very close for many, many years. Let's take a listen to Marjorie Taylor Greene. This is just last year at the Republican National Convention as she talks about Donald Trump.
Today is a celebration. The American spirit is alive and well. And we have once again nominated for president the founding father of the America First movement, Donald John Trump.
Well, nothing looks like that could have gone wrong, but it sure has the past few weeks. This very close political relationship has really gone downhill. It primarily has to do, there are other factors, but it primarily has to do with the Jeffrey Epstein case. Marjorie Taylor Greene supports the release of those Epstein files. And until this week, when Donald Trump knew he would lose that battle, he was opposing the release.
Okay, so this is the scandal that's now threatening to completely unravel Trump's presidency. And I need you to understand just how serious the situation has become. Congress has launched multiple investigations into Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's alleged illegal orders in the September 2025 double-tap boat strikes that killed drug trafficking suspects, and a senior lawmaker has described leaked recordings from the operation as one of the most disturbing things I've ever seen. We're talking about potential war crimes, potential violations of federal criminal statutes, and a chain of command crisis that has the Pentagon reviewing whether to court-martial sitting members of Congress who urge troops to refuse unlawful orders. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us. Be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
I can't recall when they're going so south so quickly. These two, maybe a month ago, were still pretty close. And then the Epstein case comes up. She continues to say those files should be released. Donald Trump goes against her, starts calling her Marjorie Taylor Greene. Pressure mounts on her from outside sources, and she announces she will leave the House in January. So she'll still be a force, I'm sure, in politics, but she just won't be in the House. Quite a shock in Washington and really around the nation right now.
Let me walk you through what's happening because the implications go far beyond just another controversy. The boat strike operation we covered earlier has now blown up into a full-scale congressional investigation examining whether Hegseth ordered a follow-up strike on survivors, people who were already in the water after the first attack, people who were no longer combat threats, people who, under any normal interpretation of the laws of armed conflict, should have been detained rather than killed. The leaked audio of what happened during that operation is apparently so disturbing that lawmakers who've heard it are visibly shaken and struggling to describe what they witnessed. The investigations are looking at potential violations of U.S. criminal statutes governing the use of military force. They're examining potential violations of international law, including the laws of armed conflict that govern treatment of people who are hors de combat out of the fight. They're probing the chain of command to determine who ordered what, whether those orders were lawful, and whether military personnel who followed the orders bear any responsibility. This is the kind of investigation that, in other contexts, has led to war crimes prosecutions and military tribunals. Come on, think about what this means for the administration. We're not talking about a policy dispute or a political controversy. We're talking about congressional investigations into whether the Secretary of Defense ordered what would amount to the summary execution of people who no longer posed any threat. If the evidence shows that Hegseth commanded a follow-up strike specifically targeting survivors in the water, that's not aggressive counter-narcotics enforcement, that's potential murder under both domestic and international law. The situation has become so serious that 6 Democratic lawmakers, including Senator Mark Kelly, Representative Alyssa Slotkin, and Representative Jason Crow, all with military or national security backgrounds, released a video urging service members to refuse illegal orders. They weren't calling for insubordination or mutiny. They were reminding troops of their legal obligation under the Uniform Code of Military Justice to refuse orders that violate the law. This is basic military ethics that's taught to every service member. You don't follow unlawful orders, period. Trump's response was to call this seditious and demand an FBI investigation into the lawmakers. The FBI has opened an inquiry into these 6 Democrats for making a video that essentially quotes existing military regulations about the duty to refuse unlawful commands. The Pentagon is reportedly reviewing whether to pursue court-martial proceedings against Senator Kelly, who served as a Navy captain and astronaut before entering politics. The administration is treating the reminder about unlawful orders as a greater offense than the potentially unlawful orders themselves. This is an extraordinary escalation. Lawmakers with military backgrounds telling troops to follow the law are being investigated. Meanwhile, the Secretary of Defense, who may have ordered what amounts to a war crime, remains in his position with full presidential support. The message being sent to the military is chilling. Follow orders no matter how illegal, and anyone who says otherwise will face prosecution. The GOP is divided on how to respond. Some Republican lawmakers are defending the administration and dismissing the concerns as Democratic overreach. Others are visibly uncomfortable with what the leaked recordings reveal and are declining to offer full-throated support for Hegseth. The division reflects the impossible position the party is in. Defending potential war crimes is politically toxic, but breaking with Trump is politically suicidal for most Republican politicians. The connection to calls for Trump's resignation or removal is direct and growing. If the Secretary of Defense ordered war crimes, the president who appointed him and supports him bears responsibility. The impeachment resolutions pending in Congress, H. Reserns 353 and H. Reserns 537, gain additional momentum from evidence of unlawful military operations. The 36% approval rating reflects a public already skeptical of Trump, and revelations about potential war crimes will only accelerate that decline. The military itself is showing signs of strain. The chain of command depends on trust. Officers and enlisted personnel need to believe that orders coming down are lawful and that following them won't result in their prosecution for war crimes. When that trust breaks down, the entire military structure becomes unstable. The boat strike controversy and the administration's response to criticism are creating exactly this kind of breakdown. So in this video, we're going to break down exactly what the congressional investigations are examining and what the leaked recordings apparently reveal. We're going to look at the legal standards that apply to military operations and how the boat strike may have violated them. We're going to examine the administration's unprecedented retaliation against lawmakers who reminded troops of their duty to refuse unlawful orders. And we're going to discuss why this scandal represents a genuine threat to Trump's continuation in office. Let's get into it. All right, let's get into the specific details of what the investigations are examining and why legal experts believe the boat strike operation may have crossed serious legal lines that could result in criminal consequences for those involved. The September 2025 boat strike operation in the Caribbean targeted a vessel suspected of drug trafficking. The initial strike disabled or destroyed the boat. That part of the operation, while aggressive, fell within the range of actions that might be justified under counter-narcotics authorities. The controversy centers entirely on what happened after, the alleged double-tap strike that targeted survivors in the water. The laws of armed conflict, sometimes called international humanitarian law, establish clear rules about the treatment of people who are hors de combat, meaning out of the fight. This category includes people who have surrendered, people who are incapacitated by wounds, and people who are otherwise no longer capable of fighting. Once someone is hors de combat, they must be treated humanely and cannot be targeted for additional violence. Deliberately killing people who have already been neutralized violates these fundamental protections. The leaked recording that lawmakers have described as one of the most disturbing things I've ever seen apparently captures what happened during the follow-up strike. The specific contents haven't been made fully public, but the reactions from lawmakers who've heard it suggest it documents something genuinely horrifying. Likely audio or video of survivors being targeted and killed after the initial attack had already incapacitated them. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth allegedly ordered this follow-up strike. The chain of command questions we discussed earlier, with Trump claiming he didn't authorize the second strike, while the White House said Hegseth gave the green light, remain unresolved. But congressional investigators are now trying to determine exactly who ordered what and whether those orders constituted violations of federal criminal statutes and international law. Under U.S. law, military personnel can be prosecuted for war crimes under the War Crimes Act, 18 U.S.C. Section 2441, if they commit grave breaches of the Geneva Conventions. Deliberately killing protected persons, including people who are hors de combat, qualifies as a grave breach. If Hegseth ordered the killing of survivors who were no longer combatants, that order itself could constitute a criminal offense, and those who carried it out could face prosecution as well. The 2024 Supreme Court immunity ruling that granted presidents broad protection for official acts creates complicated questions about Hegseth's potential liability. Some legal scholars argue that if Hegseth was acting on presidential orders, he might claim derivative immunity from prosecution. Others argue that war crimes fall outside any legitimate official function and cannot be shielded by immunity. These are novel legal questions that would need to be resolved if prosecution is ever pursued. Congress has multiple investigative pathways available. The House Armed Services Committee can investigate the conduct of military operations. The House Oversight Committee can investigate executive branch misconduct. The Senate Armed Services Committee has similar authorities. Each of these bodies has subpoena power and can compel testimony from witnesses, including military personnel who were involved in the operation. The Conversation, the academic news outlet, has identified at least 5 different bodies that could potentially investigate Hegseth for illegal orders. Congressional committees, the Department of Defense Inspector General, the Department of Justice, international tribunals, and military courts. However, their analysis also notes that actual charges are unlikely given the political dynamics and the protections that executive officials typically enjoy. The 6 Democratic lawmakers who released the video urging troops to refuse illegal orders were Mark Kelly, Alyssa Slotkin, Jason Crow, and 3 others with military or national security backgrounds. Their message was straightforward. Service members have a legal and moral duty under the Uniform Code of Military Justice to refuse orders that violate the law. This principle is taught in basic training and is fundamental to military ethics. Following an unlawful order is not a defense to prosecution for the resulting misconduct. Trump's characterization of this video as seditious is legally and factually wrong. Sedition involves attempting to overthrow the government or incite rebellion. Reminding service members of their existing legal obligations is the opposite of sedition. It's reinforcing the rule of law within the military structure. But Trump's rhetoric reveals how he views any resistance to his commands, even legally required resistance to unlawful orders. The FBI investigation into these lawmakers is extraordinary and appears to be politically motivated rather than based on any legitimate criminal concern. Making a video that restates existing military law is not a crime. If it were, every military ethics instructor in the country would be subject to prosecution. The investigation appears designed to intimidate lawmakers who speak out and to send a message that criticizing the administration's military operations will result in retaliation. The Pentagon's review of potential court-martial proceedings against Senator Kelly is even more extreme. Kelly is a retired Navy captain who flew combat missions and commanded space shuttle missions. He knows military law and military ethics as well as anyone in Congress. The idea that he should be court-martialed for telling troops to follow the law they're already required to follow is absurd on its face, but it signals how far the administration is willing to go to punish dissent. The military's internal reaction to these controversies is significant. Career officers and senior enlisted personnel understand that following unlawful orders can result in prosecution, while refusing them is legally protected. When civilian leadership appears to be issuing potentially unlawful orders and then retaliating against anyone who says so, it creates confusion and fear throughout the ranks. The resulting breakdown in trust and discipline is dangerous for military effectiveness and for the service members caught in the middle. The Republican divide on how to respond reflects the political trap the party is in. Defending potential war crimes is a losing position with general election voters, but criticizing Trump or Hegseth risks primary challenges from MAGA loyalists. Most Republican lawmakers are trying to avoid commenting at all, hoping the controversy will somehow resolve itself or be overtaken by other news. Okay, so let's break this down into the key points that everyone needs to understand, because this boat strike scandal has escalated into something that threatens the very foundations of lawful military command and potentially the Trump presidency itself. Point number 1, the congressional investigations are examining potential violations of both U.S. criminal statutes and international law related to the alleged double-tap strike that targeted survivors in the water after the initial attack, with lawmakers describing leaked recordings as one of the most disturbing things I've ever seen. This isn't a policy dispute, it's an investigation into what may constitute war crimes under the laws of armed conflict. Point number 2, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth allegedly ordered the follow-up strike that killed people who were already incapacitated and no longer posed any threat, which if proven would violate the fundamental prohibition against targeting people who are hors de combat. The chain of command confusion, with Trump denying authorization while the White House said Hegseth gave the order, remains unresolved and is central to the investigations. Point number 3, 6 Democratic lawmakers with military and national security backgrounds released a video reminding troops of their legal duty to refuse unlawful orders, and the Trump administration responded by calling them seditious and launching FBI and court-martial investigations against them. The retaliation against lawmakers who restated existing military law signals how far the administration will go to punish any questioning of its military operations. Point number 4, the investigations could implicate Trump himself under theories of command responsibility or aiding and abetting if evidence shows he ordered, authorized, or covered up unlawful strikes, though the 2024 Supreme Court immunity ruling creates novel legal questions about presidential liability for military operations. Point number 5, the scandal is fracturing military trust and discipline by creating situations where service members don't know whether following orders will expose them to prosecution, while the administration retaliates against anyone who reminds troops of their legal protections and obligations. The description of the leaked recording as one of the most disturbing things I've ever seen by a senior lawmaker carries significant weight. Members of Congress, especially those on armed services and intelligence committees, have access to classified materials about military operations, intelligence activities, and other sensitive matters. They've seen disturbing things. For something to stand out as particularly horrifying suggests the recording documents conduct that goes beyond aggressive military action into something that shocks even hardened observers. The legal framework for evaluating this conduct is well established. The laws of armed conflict exist precisely to prevent the kind of conduct that may have occurred in this strike: the killing of people who are no longer threats, the denial of quarter to survivors, the transformation of military operations into something closer to executions. These laws emerged from the horrors of previous conflicts and represent humanity's attempt to impose limits even in the violence of war. Violations are treated seriously by the international community and by the U.S. military's own justice system. The administration's response to criticism has been to attack the critics rather than address the substance. When 6 lawmakers with military backgrounds say troops should follow the law, the proper response is agreement. Of course, troops should follow the law. Instead, the administration launched investigations and threatened court-martial. This response reveals consciousness of guilt. If the administration believed its orders were lawful, it would welcome reminders about following lawful orders. The aggressive retaliation suggests they know the orders were problematic. Senator Kelly's situation is particularly striking. He served his country with distinction as a Navy combat pilot and astronaut. He commanded space shuttle missions that required split-second life-and-death decisions. His judgment and patriotism are beyond question. The idea that he should be court-martialed for making a video about military law is so absurd that it can only be understood as intimidation, a message to other lawmakers that speaking out will be punished regardless of the merits. The chilling effect on military personnel is the most dangerous consequence of this entire situation. Service members are trained that they must refuse unlawful orders, but they're also trained to follow the chain of command. When those principles conflict, when the chain of command issues unlawful orders and then retaliates against anyone who says they shouldn't be followed, the entire system breaks down. Service members are left trying to navigate impossible situations where any choice could end their careers or freedom. For the 2026 implications, this scandal provides Democrats with a powerful issue that transcends normal partisan politics. Potential war crimes committed by the administration, retaliation against lawmakers who reminded troops of their legal duties, confusion in the military chain of command. These are concerns that resonate beyond the Democratic base. Independent voters and even some Republicans may be troubled by evidence that the administration ordered the killing of incapacitated people and then attacked anyone who questioned it. The impeachment resolutions gain momentum from these revelations. H. Resner 353 and H. Resner 537 provide vehicles for holding Trump accountable, and evidence of unlawful military operations strengthens the case for removal. Whether impeachment could succeed in a Republican-controlled House is doubtful, but the accumulation of scandals, Epstein, the boat strikes, the legal judgments, the self-pardon discussions, creates a comprehensive case that may affect how history judges this presidency and how voters respond in 2026. The GOP's division on this issue reflects the impossible position Republican lawmakers are in. Defending potential war crimes is morally untenable and politically dangerous, but criticizing Trump or Hegseth risks the wrath of the MAGA base that demands absolute loyalty. Most Republicans are trying to stay quiet and hope the story goes away. But congressional investigations have their own momentum, and leaked recordings have their own power to shape public opinion, regardless of what politicians say. Hegseth's position is increasingly precarious. As defense secretary, he's ultimately responsible for the conduct of military operations under his command. If investigations conclude he ordered unlawful strikes, his continued service becomes untenable regardless of Trump's support. The military brass, already uncomfortable with civilian leadership that may have directed war crimes, will resist following a secretary whose orders are legally questionable. The command structure depends on trust that Hegseth may have destroyed. For Trump personally, the question is whether this scandal reaches critical mass that threatens his hold on power. At 36% approval, he has limited political capital to survive additional crises. The combination of Epstein revelations, legal judgments, financial pressures, health concerns, Republican infighting, and now potential war crimes creates cumulative damage that may exceed what any president could survive. Calls for resignation, already present, will intensify if the investigations produce damning findings. Anyway, that's where things stand with this exploding boat strike scandal that has triggered congressional investigations, allegations of potential war crimes, and an administration crackdown on lawmakers who remind troops to follow the law. The leaked recordings described as deeply disturbing, the double tap strike targeting survivors that may violate the laws of armed conflict, the FBI investigation and court-martial threats against lawmakers who quoted existing military regulations, the GOP division on how to respond, and the growing calls for Trump to step down as the presidency unravels. Make sure you're subscribed because this scandal is accelerating rapidly and the investigations will produce additional revelations in the coming weeks. What the recordings actually show, what witnesses tell congressional investigators, whether Hegseth survives in his position, whether this reaches the level that threatens Trump's continuation as president, all of it will unfold with major implications for American governance and accountability. And if you think the pressure on Trump from this scandal is intense now, just wait until the full recordings are released and the American public can see for themselves what happened in that boat strike. I'll see you in the next one.